So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of our Speedy Live panel discussions today. We're doing things slightly different this year. We want to make sure that we don't just have a great expo, but we also discuss the really important issues that face us, our customers, and our supply chain partners as well. The first of these discussions today is around women in construction. And what we want to explore is the pivotal role that more and more women are playing within our sector, how we're breaking down barriers, and how we are inspiring the next generation of women and girls to come into the construction sector. I'm delighted to be joined on stage today by our Chief People Officer, Ellie Armour, and our People Compliance, ESG and Governance Manager, did I get that right, Ange?
You did.
Angela Hughes on stage. So first of all, in the conference, we heard how we've made significant progress in getting more and more women into the sector. So can you just tell me where we're at the moment in terms of how many women at this moment in time work for Speedy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be precise, which Paul Rayner will really be pleased with. We've got 22.7% of females here at Speedy, and that has moved from around 17% back in 2018. So we've moved significantly, and we're planning to try and move. And we talk about gender minorities at Speedy, which obviously females are in the minority group. And the plan is that we get our gender minority percentage up to 30% by 2030. So from where we are today, we're just shy of 24% of our colleagues in gender minority groups. So we really got to move 1% each year. And what that means for us here, that's about 34 colleagues a year if we stayed at exactly the same headcount that needs to increase in gender minority groups. So it's really difficult because we don't have a plethora of females or people from other gender minority groups knocking at our door to join this sort of industry, and that's the thing we need to change.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's one of those things that is, as we change the perception of what the construction industry looks like, that is something, that we don't just don't follow the market around, we have to lead on as well. So thinking back just a few years ago when you were thinking about your own career opportunities, why did you want to go and work? Did you want to come and work in a construction-facing sector, or was it something you didn't want to go on? What about you, Ange?
No, it never entered my mind. I think when you're at school, and we're going back a while now, the career advice girls get from boys is very different. You're told to go into hospitality, all of the industries that are female heavy. They don't talk to you about the different types of industries that are available with the skill set you've got, that you just shoehorned into one particular career channel. And then over the course of my careers, I've been in banking, I've been in house building, and now with Speedy, and all of those roles are predominantly male. It doesn't matter whereabout you sit within the hierarchy, you will always see that there are more male faces than yours. But no, construction was never on my agenda at age 18. Yeah. I was going into social work. I was going to be a probationary officer. That's where I was heading to. And again, that was deemed to be a female role because of the empathetic skill set women carry, more so. But yeah, it definitely wasn't on mine.
No.
What about you, Ellie? Was that a similar experience?
It makes me laugh when you ask that question. I was talking to Simon earlier, and back in my day, which was quite a long time ago now, we had a careers officer at school. And we went in and we answered a series of questions. And, as a 14-year-old girl thinking about what options I was going to take to do my GCSEs, I thought I was doing some sort of science-based, survey that was going to tell me the perfect career for all of my skills and strengths, etc., and the stuff I was doing well at school. So I answered these questions, and then what got played back to me, and I do laugh, and actually it did, cause a direction of travel, but that I would be a great air hostess in the travel industry, and there's nothing wrong with that, and actually I thought, I do want to travel, that might be a fantastic job. Hair and beauty was something that I should really strongly consider based on my skill set and my creative thinking at that point in time, or into hospitality in respect of hotel management. And actually, when I then chose my options, I kind of steered in that direction of travel. And actually, I went on to do a degree in hotel and business management, so I could make gatos for 600 people if anyone wants me to. So I didn't go anywhere near, and nobody mentioned construction. And I think, look, to be fair, it starts even before that. So if I think about being a young girl, and actually my mum and dad had 2 girls, so it wasn't like there was a boy in the mix for me to look at other stuff. But, they bought me dolls, we had prams, we had cuddly toys, we played banks, we played hairdresser, Girls' World, Barbie, Cindy, so, and I loved it all. I absolutely loved it all. So I think you start with a mindset from a very, very young age. And that then matures, and you go into school, you do listen to the teachers, to the career officer. I then take a degree in hospitality. I work in a hotel for a year as part of that degree, and that was my first little insight into HR. And I helped recruit somebody, train somebody, and I thought, you know what, I really like this. But I was still thinking it's doing that in an industry that's been pointed out to me by a careers officer. So I did it in hospitality to begin with.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of those, I think our industry is just one of those where it really plays up to gender stereotypes at a really early age. Another one of those is obviously careers you've mentioned within travel, but specifically in aviation. And we are just going to watch a video at the moment, which has been produced, I think, by EasyJet.
Yeah.
And it sort of highlights the sort of stereotypes that sort of are taught, let's face it, from a very early age, whether that be at home or whether that be through education. So hopefully now on the screens either side of us, that video should, like magic, just appear.
I'm a lorry driver. I'm Farmer Sam. I'm Bill. Right, we're gonna do the register.
Can you do an impression of a mechanic?
Hello.
What do mechanics do?
They fix your engines.
How about a nurse? How would you describe a nurse?
They have a high-pitched voice sometimes. Hello, are you here to get your medicine?
Can you do an impression of a builder?
Hello, I'm Bob the Builder. We are builders and we're both very grumpy.
And what about a pilot? What do you think they look like?
Tall, big. My name is John. I'm Captain James. I'm Captain Jamie.
What's your captain name?
Mr. Banana. This is your captain speaking. This is your captain speaking. This is your captain speaking.
I want to introduce you to our very special guest. It's a pilot.
Hi kids, this is the captain speaking. My name's Rebecca and I'm an EasyJet pilot. We come in and we sit at the front of the plane here. Does anyone know what this part of the plane's called?
The cockpit.
The cockpit, absolutely.
I'm always sitting like that.
You in the back there, out the wing, yeah.
So I think that really does highlight the point that we're making. I think when we were discussing this, going through a preparatory sessions for this, Ellie, this was one of the things you mentioned. So what Is that similar to the sort of experience that you had when you were at school and you were being pushed down a certain path?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But, it's I think it happens to everybody, doesn't it? And I don't think anyone's meant it to happen, because if you flip the coin, all the men sitting in the audience would say nobody spoke to them about being a hairdresser or a beautician or some of the other things. So they've probably been limited in respect of some of the options and choices that they took. And I think this is about, when we take a look at our industry and we want to become more diverse, how can you be unless you go all the way back to those early years? And we've got to reconfigure, the way in which we educate our children from the time that we give birth as a mother and, you become a father, and how you communicate with them. And I think for myself and Ange, that video is just how it happens. It evolves. And, you've got children there, when they think about a pilot, they only think of that being a man. They don't think about that being a woman. So every child in that nursery would never have even considered, if they were a girl, that they were going to be a pilot. Yeah. So the shock on their faces when that pilot that's a female introduced himself is fantastic. But, it shouldn't be like that. So for all of us, equal genders, we should understand the plethora of opportunity out there and not feel that we're limited in any industry. And I think part of what we've got to do is help women and other gender minority groups understand that you're not limited in this industry. And actually, the reason why when we go to recruit engineers, when I go to recruit drivers and warehouse operatives, the pool of females that apply is just so small. And it's not as high as ours, 22.7%. I'm talking we're in the realms of about 6% of females will put themselves into an operational application pool. And that's not because we're doing anything wrong as an employer. It's not because there are naff careers for women in this industry, because there aren't. It's just that they would never have thought about it from a very, very young age. And myself at school, I can think all the way back to nursery as well, even. I was playing with all the girly toys. If you think about Toys R Us and how that's all moved, I was down the pink aisle, the boys were playing down the blue aisle. Yeah. And it's just how we then went. And they were more interested in Lego and bricks and building and the mechanics of stuff. And I was more interested in drawing and creating and playing with hair and all that good stuff. So I think we've just got to go back to those early years, and that's what that video absolutely demonstrates. And I think you've got some more insight on that.
Yeah, so there is a well-known period called the dream gap. And at age 4, any little girl believes she can do anything. She can be a pilot, an astronaut, all the things that you would typically think are male roles. But by the age of 7, that little girl no longer has those dreams. She believes in herself that boys are better and that boys can only do the astronaut, they can be the scientist. So that early education is so pivotal in terms of how we start to condition our children one way or another. And that education and that conditioning then will carry on throughout life, which, Ellie and I are both very passionate about trying to bring more women into this industry, but we need to try and look back what the perception of it is and how do we change that to attract more women into our industry, because we've got a lot of conditioning to overcome.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult.
Yeah. I think the point you make, particularly around how we go about it, how we've taken that decision as a business that we want to be more inclusive, we want to reflect society. I think that is clearly we've led the way in many aspects. But I think, Ellie, if you wouldn't mind just touching on a bit more, we're clearly on a journey about, over the next 5 years to increase a percentage of our workforce each year. But where have we came from so far? So what have we done in the last, sort of, say, 5 years to make Speedy more attractive to get to the place where we currently are?
Yeah, look, there's lots of walls to break through, doors to try and fling open. But I think one of the things we've done is to really focus on progressing women that were working in the business into more senior roles, to be able to put role models in place for women outside of the industry to see that there are career prospects in this sort of space. We've done a lot around early careers in respect of Jill and the team, looking at our emerging talent, so those that are already working for us here in Speedy, and understanding what are some of the reservations they have about putting themselves forward into more operational roles or thinking about progressing their careers inside of the business and trying to spend quality time sort of unlocking some of those fears. I think we've got a lot of the men in Speedy really involved in helping us, and also this sort of changing the perception that women aren't welcome, because women are welcome. The late careers mentoring. So we've got a number of different combinations, and out in Leicester, Jess has got a great mentor who's really spending quality time with her. And actually, when I spoke to her about what it felt like being the only female working in Leicester and being an apprentice, she was like, I just fit right in. The guys have made me feel really welcome and really special, and they want to be able to impart those skills to me. So I think we've got to change the perception that if you go and join a team that is all men, and listen, you're never going to change it from being all men unless one woman joins that team.
Yeah, absolutely.
That actually that will be really welcoming. But we have had to modify some stuff. So, Dan mentioned it this morning that, you'd go into, our depots, not of the future, but our depots of the past, and those that, there's lots of them around, and eventually we will have great new properties that are far more inviting. But when you go into the depot, so in the old Leicester, so the first time I went, and I'm sure Matt Whitney won't mind me saying, but I went into Leicester and I needed to use the loo, and I had to climb over all the cleaning fluids and God knows what, and get through, to get into the toilet, at which point then I had to clear off the top of the toilet and everything. Used it, and then actually, because nobody had ever hasn't used that toilet for a very long time, you can imagine the sort of horrible musty smell you get when you open the lid.
Yeah.
And then actually, when I went to leave the toilet, it wouldn't even open. It had all like jammed up. So I was in there for ages thinking they obviously think I've got a problem. I didn't have a problem other than I couldn't break out of it. But so these sorts of things, really making sure that there are facilities for females. Look, let's put it out there. We have periods, right up to you get old like me and you don't have one anymore, but we have periods. And if you're working in a depot and you've got a problem and there isn't a tampon machine or a sanitary unit, and actually you're working with a team of men, that's really embarrassing. So making sure those sorts of things are available. But actually, all the men we work with, your dads, your sons, your brothers. So you get it. It's not something to be fearful of, but it's about that welcoming feel. So a lot of the men in the business have really worked closely with us. We've set up lots of things. So Ange in particular with the gender balance group. So we've got a committee of people really focused on brainstorming, what could we do? What were some of the things that prevented you from wanting to join Speedy? What are the things that that if you were to get your daughter to come and work here, or invite your wife to work here, or your sister, etc., would you want them to go and, work in the old Leicester or in Northampton or wherever, would you want them to go there? And if you were to go, wouldn't be a place I'd recommend, tell me why. What are those things? Because those are things we need to change, because we want you to want, your female, friends, family to want to come and join the business. We've done a lot around graduate and apprenticeship programs in particular, working with education to really focus in on a lot of the programs where there's a lot of women, a lot of young students, females that are still thinking about their careers and choices. And although they might already be swimming in a lane where they want to be a marketeer or they want to be a finance or an IT person, talking to them about you can follow that career as well inside a construction. It's not limited to going into tourism, hospitality, etc. So there's a lot in place, and I know you'll want to add lots. So sorry, I'm stealing all your thunder. So Ange is running a fabulous committee that are really passionate about wanting to make some changes. So
I think some of the changes we've also put in place are not the ones that you class as being a standout, but put us ahead of our competitors. Yeah. So a year ago, last December, we became an early adopter of the new legislation coming in around flexible working. It's proven that women are attracted to industries that have flexible working. So the laws are changing. We adopted that over a year ago. The neonatal care bill doesn't come until next year. We adopted that last year as well. So there are things we're looking at internally that will help to position us ahead of people and start really changing that culture. Also been working closely with Rabab around inclusive recruitment. So we're going to be rolling out anonymisation of CVs, and people may think, why is that important? It's very important because some people we all have an unconscious bias. We will look at a piece of paper, we will see a name, we will see an ethnicity, we will see a sexuality. We want to take that away so that people just look at the skills. What is that CV telling you about that person? And that's something that Rabab's really passionate about. So we are trying to look inwards to see what we can do as a company that actually nobody else is looking at the moment, and just adopting 2 major policy changes 18 months before the law says you've got to. That's key. So when we are doing our recruitment, we talk about those things. Flexible working, you can have it from a day one, right? You haven't got to demonstrate how it's going to benefit the business. So we are really looking at, what makes a difference to a woman or a gender minority if they're looking for a level of flexibility within their business. We have hybrid working. Yes, COVID was a positive disruptor in some places, but there's many businesses now that are forcing people back into the office. So you're starting to then limit the choices of the people that are available to fill those roles. So it's all about our marketing of what we're doing as well, and making sure we're telling the right story when we're at that recruitment stage, or when people are perhaps not happy and they're thinking about that resignation. Why is that? What can we do before it becomes it's a done deal? Yeah. So we're looking at a lot of things, and we'll touch on some more as we go through this, but it's what can we do to position ourselves ahead of the pack. I do believe we are going in the right direction with some of the things that we are putting in place.
Yeah, I think you've raised a lot of really good points here, and a lot of really good practice about what we currently do to get people into the business. I think the next area I just want to sort of focus on a bit more is actually when people join. So I think specifically in how people then, and how women coming into the business, and how we, generally speaking as a Speedy business, how we then network. And I know, Ange, you've done a lot of good work with others who I'm sure are in the audience today, to build those networks, I say, not just in Speedy, but across our sector.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit more about that?
So we've reached out to people like Cadence, who they've got their affinity groups. We're looking to see, are we doing things that they're doing? Is there any best practices that we can share? And it was comforting, actually, when we were speaking to them. We're all doing very much the same thing. May go about it slightly different. Our starting points may be slightly different, but we're fundamentally all tapping into the same initiatives. We've looked with a lot of collaborations within the business, so Ellie's touched upon a few. So we've got people like the Early Careers Foundations, where we're looking at having those positive collaborations through mentoring. We're hopefully going into a collaboration with a company called Delagio Rugby Works, which is founded by a very famous ex-rugby player. But that is looking at children who come from generational poverty, who are going to schools where the teachers aren't aspiring them to be the best version that they can possibly be. And they're one step away from crime, or one step away from poverty and hunger. So we're looking at doing the right thing for these collaborations as well. There's so many different organisations you can tap into. We want to work more with our supply chain. We want to see how we can share what we're doing with our SMEs. We've got plans afoot to start collaborating with some of our tier 1 customers, because this isn't just a Speedy issue. This is a pan-construction issue. And if we're all trying to solve the problem, we'll get there a lot quicker if we do it as a collaborative. Because we're not looking to crack the atom, but there's got to be something fundamentally that we can all do to change that gender minority perspective. And there's some of the things that we've got in the pipeline for the gender group that we're working with. But collaboration is definitely going to be key. So it's either us collaborating with bespoke organisations, or us as an industry getting our heads together and all crossing the finishing line together, because it's not going to happen if we're all pulling in different directions.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. The construction industry sits at sort of tier 1, 26% female, so we're just a couple of cent behind, but we're actually sit within tier 2 as a supplier to main contractors. And actually that pool sits at around 18% at the moment in respect of females. So we are ahead of our tier, but we're not up where the wider construction, and they've actually moved from 22% up to 26%. So again, we can learn from some of our at the, sort of the big customers that we work with, the Morgan Sindals of this world, as to how they attract more women into their businesses. But of course, just like in Speedy, you do find that you have a nucleus of females that sit within the central functions. And actually the same goes when you go to a Morgan Sindall, a Costain, a SPE and so on. A lot of the women are working in finance, in marketing, in HR, in ESG. So they still have this same old problem that there aren't a lot of female engineers, operatives, labourers. Now there is the whole, debate around physicality, and we can't, there's an elephant in the room when it comes to that can sometimes be a problem. And I've had this conversation numerous times when you meet some of the female lifting engineers that we've got. That would be my first thought would be, God, all this really big kit. And, how do you do it physically? But you know what? A male isn't expected to pick up something that's really, really heavy. You have kit that moves kit. And that kit is then something that anybody, no matter what your, welterweight is. So I think, again, it's change in perception. I mean, that was even my perception. I was like, oh, how on earth are you going to do that? And the lady up in Scotland said to me, well, they normally call me over to get the bolts off anyway. So I think we've got to change perception about our industry, and it's got to start at grassroots. And I think we've done a lot in getting into what I'd say the sort of 14-year-old plus. Jill and the team work really well with that group. We all sort of get involved, different volunteering, different mentoring, the collaboration groups, that we really managed to find an in there. But I think it's how do you change it, from the time somebody's born until all the way through their life, so we all have those equal thoughts about careers.
No, and I think coming back to that point about making sure that it isn't just something that happens, when women and girls start to think about what they want to do when they grow up. As you say, it has to be something that is much more encouraging earlier on in their life. I think another one of the things I think that we have been really proactive about is signing up to the women empowerment principles, and certainly that will make a big difference for us now, but in years to come as well. So can you tell me a bit more about that? What they mean? I'm sure it was something relatively new to me when you mentioned it, Ange. So could you just explain a bit more about that?
So the Women Empowerment Principles is a framework that's been put together by the United Nations. So Speedy Hire are a participating member of something called the UN Global Compact. So myself and one of my colleagues who was here, Jen, have just undertaken a 9-month programme called the Target Gender Equality Programme. And we are now, Speedy are one of 197 companies in the UK that have completed the WEPS programme. What it does, it provides a holistic framework based upon a key number of metrics and targets and objectives and deliverables to help you assess where you are as a company and the journey that you want to go on. It's well known that commercially, the more diverse a company is, the more successful it becomes. They are proven stats. You've only got to look at McKinsey's, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, it's proven. So what we're trying to do is how do we then put that into a plan? So last September, we did our first initial assessment and we scored 17%. And I was like, whoa, I genuinely thought we were better than that. But when you start looking at the questions and where it then takes you, actually I felt some level of comfort because we're sort of 35% of the overall WEPS population that will end up in that beginners category. But we normally should take an assessment every 12 months, but what we've done is I took one early to see how we've improved, and we have. We've gone from 17% to 44% in 6 months. We've had a massive jump in leadership strategic and the support that we're getting from the executive team to do what we want to do, but we've also had a major increase in implementation, which is really, really important. Some of the things that the group have been looking at are inclusive recruitment, women's PPE and hygiene facilities. We're looking to go into a partnership with a company called Hey Girls, touching on something that Ellie has mentioned, that having some female hygiene products in some of our units. So Maria is very passionate about that and is leading on that. We're looking at maternity and paternity. We're looking at the benefits and the processes that sit around that. The flexible working, the training that we're giving our line managers. So I'm working closely with the development team, and we're rolling out a whole new suite of management training, but also all colleague training. And again, there are some legislative changes that are coming in, and we want to be ahead of that curveball. So to make sure that we are, going to end up anywhere, we want to get our staff trained with the right things. But we're looking at a whole plethora of things: early careers, late careers. We've got STEM ambassadors. We're looking at how diverse our supply chain is. How can we help them to be more diverse? Because that again will benefit us in the long run. We're looking at responsible marketing, and I think Paul Jackson touched upon it before. People see marketing with just white faces. So we're looking at, well, how can we bring more diversity into our marketing imagery as well? So it's not just looking at the things you would typically think about when you're looking at it. So it's a roadmap. We know we've got more to do. Ideally, we want to do another assessment in 6 months and want to see that improve. So Jen and I are going to work on what that roadmap looks like for Speedy. What can we do? What can we look at? But we went to a United Nations event a few weeks for our passing out ceremony, and I spoke to this guy who was a scientist, and they started on 15%. They're now at 46% in 5 years. And I said to him, how'd you do it? And he was like, we flooded the corporate functions with women. And that's a scientist. So that's typically a male industry. But then once they were in, they could see what other industries and what other roles were available within that industry. And it's really starting to drive their female engineers. So there's loads to do. There is loads to do. We've tried to look this year at where are the easier wins. What ones can we do with limited budgets? What ones can we do that we can have an immediate impact with? They're the ones we've gone for. So we've got some short terms, which we've boxed off. We're going to now start looking at our medium and our long-term goals, because we've got to 2030 to achieve it, but we need to see that incremental improvement each year, so we haven't got a massive hurdle as it's getting closer to 2030. And I do strongly believe that the work that we're doing, we may be the idea, the creativity, but it's been with the help and the support of the wider business, because we've took our ideas to them and said, what do you think of this? They've bought into it. They can see the benefit of what we're trying to achieve. So, we may be doing a lot of work over here, but it's the wider business that's buying into it and is helping us to achieve those. So, it's kudos to everybody who said yes, basically, to us.
Definitely, and I think one of the key things to pull out from that is the progress that we've made, particularly around women empowerment principles in really such a short space of time. So full credit to everyone, I guess, who's been involved with that. Ange touched on the sort of short term improvements we can make, Ellie, but where do you see the sort of more medium and long term solutions to improving things?
Some of the big changes that need to happen are going to require some investment. So, and unashamedly, Dan spoke earlier about, under the People First banner, we need to grow, we need to be more profitable, and then we can reinvest in people. And actually, females are people who would need to benefit from some of that. And, one of the things that Ange and I would really like to have done in the last financial year, but we couldn't, and we'll review it partway through the coming up financial year, will be improving our family-friendly policies in particular. So, and that's extending, paid paternity as well as maternity. So this is for both gender groups, but of course for a majority of females that take the longer time off, there's a huge disconnect in terms of disproportionate amount of loss of earnings that happen. So that's something that we do want to make a difference on, but that will cost a lot of money to the business, and we need to grow before we can invest in that. I think the other big one for us in particular is around sort of leadership development, and that is something that we are investing in, but there's more to do. And specifically around, females that are wanting to develop to be leaders of the future. And again, there's this sort of misconception that, if I want to have a child and I'm going to go off on maternity leave, then my career has to stop. And actually, and depending how long I'm going to take off with my child and whether I want to do school runs and be at home and all that good stuff, then everything comes to a grinding halt. Part of what we want to do at Speedy is to help females understand, well, the career development doesn't need to stop, but we'll work it around you and what it is that you're able to do. I watched this really great presentation from a CEO, this is like a number of years back, who was taking some time out to have children. And her boss, as soon as she came back, said, right, I want to do X, Y, and Z with you because we want you to be the supply chain director in 2 years' time. And she was like, oh, you know, I've got a 6-month-old baby, like what you're talking about. Well, the choice is yours. You know, we think you can do it. We're willing to work around what you're able to do whilst you're bringing up a young child, etc. But we don't want your career to stop. Going to get kicked off now, aren't we? We're going to get kicked off.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah. So I think I think the big things to happen now are going to require investment into the future, and therefore they're not parked. They're on a list ready to go. And the policies have been updated, the costs have been run, and I'm really looking forward to being able to introduce that and be as competitive as the likes of all the big supermarkets that have gone out there with that. You know, our roadmap is to be a top 100 best places to work, and I absolutely want to get this business here. We all do, but we've got to be able to move in line with the profitability of the business. So the more we make, the more we can invest, and I'm really excited because we want to do it all, and we want this to be a destination of choice for all gender groups, and something that from a female perspective wouldn't think, you know, anything other than, well, that's definitely a place for me to go and work, because it is. And the females that do work here, we work with some fantastic guys, and it is an incredible place, and you belong to a family, and that's what's really important at Speedy. That spirit is wrapped around you, no matter what your gender minority, no matter what your diversity, and that's why this is an important place to come. So as a child, we've got to help people understand that, so they don't get put off at some point along the road, and we only get to having 20 plus, you know, percents of minority groups looking at this business. We want that to be, you know, 50-50. You know, as a nation, we're 50-50. So why wouldn't 50-50 want to look at coming at every industry? Hairdressing, construction.
Yeah, no,
Definitely.
and I think that is exactly it. You know, I mean, it is, how do we embrace the strength of our diversity, or our potential diversity, to get the most out of our business, particularly with the growth targets that we have in place. I must admit, when we had the preparation calls for this, I had a feeling that this panel was going to run over, because there's so many topics that I think we've really just scratched the surface on. But I know how important it is that we are working really hard, or the people and the teams involved within the people team are working really hard to deliver on that. So as we heard from the voice of the gods, we are now going to have to bring this panel session to an end. But just before we finish up, I really would like the whole audience to thank Ellie and Ange for their contribution and really making a great session. Thank you.
David, thank you.
Thank you.